Holman Correctional Facility, Alabama. For decades, one prison in rural Alabama has carried a reputation that reaches far beyond its concrete walls. A place where violence has erupted without warning, where correctional officers have worked under constant pressure, and where some of the state's most dangerous inmates have spent years waiting for execution. Behind these fences, survival has often depended less on official rules than on understanding an invisible system built by the people living inside. And what happens deeper inside these walls is even more unsettling than most people realize. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe for more in-depth crime documentaries, and leave a comment sharing where you're watching from. Now, let's step inside one of Alabama's most infamous prisons. A prison built for Alabama's most dangerous men. Holman Correctional Facility stands in Atmore, Alabama, a small town surrounded by forests and long stretches of highway. At first glance, the prison appears much like many maximum security facilities across the United States. Tall fences wrapped in razor wire. Concrete housing units. Guard towers overlooking every possible escape route. But appearances can be misleading. Since opening in 1969, Holman has become one of the most recognizable prisons in the American South. It serves several roles within Alabama's correctional system, each carrying enormous responsibility. Most famously, Holman houses Alabama's male death row inmates. For decades, nearly every man sentenced to death in Alabama eventually arrived here. Some remained only a few years before their appeals ended. Others waited decades, watching time slowly disappear while legal battles continued far beyond these walls. But death row represents only one part of Holman's identity. The prison also houses inmates serving life sentences, many convicted of violent crimes including murder, armed robbery, kidnapping, and assault. Some will never leave alive. Housing so many high-risk inmates inside one facility creates challenges unlike those faced by lower security prisons. Every movement must be controlled. Every interaction carries risk. Every mistake can have deadly consequences. Yet despite strict security procedures, Holman has repeatedly become the focus of national attention, not because of escapes, but because of what has happened inside. And those events reveal a prison struggling with problems that have built over decades. To understand why Holman became so dangerous, we first have to understand the conditions that shaped life behind these walls. Designed for control, struggling with reality. When Holman first opened, it represented a modern approach to incarceration for Alabama. The facility was built to improve security while housing inmates considered too dangerous for lower security institutions. Everything about its design emphasized control. Housing units could be monitored from secure officer stations. Heavy steel doors separated different sections. Movement between areas required multiple locked gates. In theory, the layout minimized opportunities for violence. Reality turned out very differently. As Alabama's prison population steadily increased over the following decades, Holman began housing more inmates than it had originally been designed for. Overcrowding changes everything inside a prison. Cells built for one person may eventually hold two. Common areas become packed. Resources become strained. Medical care becomes harder to provide. Programs designed to reduce idleness often cannot accommodate everyone. Tension quietly grows. Prison officials across America have long recognized that overcrowding doesn't automatically create violence. But it increases stress. It reduces personal space. It creates frustration over even the smallest daily routines. Inside Holman, those pressures combined with another problem that proved just as serious. Staff shortages. Correctional officers perform one of the most difficult jobs in the criminal justice system. They supervise hundreds of inmates. Respond to emergencies. Search for contraband. Prevent assaults. Escort prisoners throughout the facility. Maintain order during meals, recreation, medical visits, and countless daily activities. When enough officers are available, these responsibilities become difficult. When staffing levels fall far below recommended numbers, maintaining control becomes significantly harder. At Holman, chronic staffing shortages became one of the defining issues discussed in inspections, legal filings, and news reports over many years. Fewer officers often meant supervising larger numbers of inmates. That reality affected nearly every part of prison life. And in some situations, it left officers responding to violence rather than preventing it. What happened next would help shape Holman's national reputation. A day inside Holman. Every prison develops its own rhythm. Holman's begins before sunrise. Long before daylight fully reaches the prison yard, officers begin preparing for the first official inmate count. Every person inside must be accounted for. Count procedures happen multiple times every day. If numbers do not match exactly, movement throughout the prison stops. Meals wait. Programs stop. Work assignments pause. No one moves until every inmate has been located. Once count clears, the day begins. Breakfast follows a carefully controlled schedule. Housing units are released one at a time. Officers watch every movement. Conversations stay brief. Some inmates eat quickly before returning to their cells. Others linger only long enough to finish their meal. Nobody wants unnecessary attention. Because inside prison, being noticed for the wrong reason can create problems that last far longer than breakfast. Throughout the day, inmates may report to prison jobs. Some work in maintenance. Others clean housing units. Some prepare food in the kitchen. Others remain inside housing areas with limited movement depending on their custody classification. For death row inmates, daily life has historically been much more restrictive. Time outside the cell is carefully controlled. Exercise occurs under supervision. Visits follow strict procedures. Every movement requires escorts. For inmates serving general population sentences, routines vary considerably. Some attend educational classes. Some participate in religious services. Others spend recreation time outdoors whenever schedules and staffing allow. Yet even during ordinary routines, another system quietly shapes prison life. It isn't written in any inmate handbook. Officers don't create it. Prison administrators don't officially recognize it. But nearly everyone learns its rules. And breaking those rules can carry consequences far more immediate than formal prison discipline. The unwritten rules. Every prison develops an unofficial culture. Holman is no exception. New arrivals quickly discover that survival depends on observation. Listen before speaking. Watch before acting. Understand who controls different areas. Respect matters. Inside prison, respect rarely means friendship. Instead, it often means avoiding unnecessary conflict. Do not interfere with another inmate's business. Do not borrow what you cannot repay. Do not make promises you cannot keep. Do not involve yourself in disputes that do not concern you. Simple mistakes can quickly grow into dangerous situations. Debt, in particular, has historically caused serious problems inside correctional facilities nationwide. Borrowing commissary items may seem harmless. But unpaid debts can create pressure. Pressure becomes threats. Threats sometimes become violence. For inmates hoping simply to complete their sentence, avoiding conflict becomes a daily priority. Many choose routines carefully. The same seat. The same walking routes. The same recreation schedule. Predictability reduces risk. Experienced inmates often recognize potential trouble long before it becomes obvious. Raised voices. Unusual gatherings. Rumors spreading across housing units. Small changes in behavior. These signs matter. Because violence inside prison rarely appears completely without warning. Often, subtle tensions build first. The question is whether anyone recognizes them in time. Unfortunately, Holman experienced periods when warning signs became impossible to ignore. Violence that drew national attention. Over the years, Holman Correctional Facility has experienced numerous violent incidents involving inmates and, at times, correctional staff. Some assaults occurred between rival inmates. Others involved homemade weapons, often referred to as shanks. Because conventional weapons are unavailable inside prison, inmates determined to attack someone frequently improvise. Pieces of metal. Sharpened plastic. Broken tools. Everyday objects can become dangerous in the wrong hands. Correctional officers conduct regular searches to locate contraband. Cells are inspected. Mattresses examined. Personal property searched. Metal detectors used whenever possible. Yet in any large prison, completely eliminating homemade weapons has proven extraordinarily difficult. News reports over the years have documented serious assaults inside Holman, contributing to growing concerns about safety for both inmates and staff. Each violent incident sparked new questions. Were staffing levels adequate? Could searches be improved? Were warning signs missed? Or had the prison reached a point where violence became increasingly difficult to prevent? Those questions would eventually attract attention far beyond Alabama. Because investigators, courts, and federal officials would begin examining not just Holman, but Alabama's prison system as a whole. And what they uncovered painted an even more troubling picture. The men who hold power. Power inside a prison rarely belongs entirely to the people wearing uniforms. Officially, correctional officers enforce every rule. They determine movement, conduct searches, issue disciplinary reports, and respond to emergencies. Unofficially, another system often develops. In nearly every long-term maximum security prison in America, inmates create their own social hierarchy. It is shaped by reputation, experience, alliances, and the ability to influence others. Holman has never been immune to that reality. Some inmates arrive with decades already spent inside Alabama's correctional system. Younger prisoners quickly recognize who has influence and who does not. Influence does not always come through violence. Sometimes it comes through knowledge. Knowing which officer works which shift. Knowing who can obtain commissary items. Knowing which housing unit is safest. Knowing how to avoid conflict. For new arrivals, that information can be more valuable than money. But influence can also become control. Prisons across the United States have struggled with inmate-run economies for decades. Tobacco, food, coffee, postage stamps, clothing, and other everyday items have all served as unofficial currency at different times. Debt follows naturally. So does intimidation. Most prisoners simply want to serve their sentence with as little trouble as possible. Others seek status. A small number pursue power. When those goals collide, violence often follows. And inside Holman, officers have sometimes found themselves trying to contain conflicts that had been building quietly for weeks. The difficult part is that prison conflicts rarely begin with loud arguments. Many start with whispers. A disagreement over property. An unpaid debt. A perceived insult. A rumor passed from one housing unit to another. By the time officers become aware of the situation, it may already be too late. What happens next often unfolds in seconds. Homemade weapons and constant searches. Every correctional officer entering Holman understands one fact before beginning a shift. Weapons can be almost anywhere. Unlike movies, prison weapons are rarely professionally made. Most are improvised. A sharpened piece of metal hidden inside a toothbrush handle. Fragments removed from old furniture. Metal taken from maintenance equipment. Plastic melted and hardened into sharp edges. Objects that seem harmless outside prison can become deadly inside. That is why searches happen constantly. Random cell inspections. Pat-down searches. Metal detector screenings. Housing unit shakedowns. Entire dormitories emptied while officers search every mattress, every locker, every vent, and every corner. Some searches recover dozens of homemade weapons. Others recover nothing. That uncertainty creates enormous pressure. An officer never knows whether the next inmate they encounter is carrying a weapon. At the same time, most inmates are not involved in violence. Many understand that every assault leads to stricter security. More lockdowns. More searches. Fewer privileges. Yet it only takes one hidden weapon to change an ordinary day into a fatal one. And Holman has experienced too many days like that. Lockdown, when the prison stops. Sometimes prison life comes to an abrupt halt. A fight. A stabbing. Contraband discovered. Intelligence suggesting violence is about to occur. When those events happen, administrators may order a lockdown. Movement stops immediately. Inmates return to their assigned cells. Programs are cancelled. Work assignments end. Outdoor recreation disappears. Meals are delivered directly through cell doors. For officers, lockdown creates a different kind of workload. Housing units must be monitored constantly. Medical emergencies still occur. Legal visits continue under strict supervision. Essential services never fully stop. For inmates, however, time begins to move differently. Hours blend together. Days become difficult to separate. Some spend the time reading. Others write letters. Some simply stare through narrow windows, waiting for restrictions to end. Long lockdowns increase frustration throughout a prison. Tension rises quietly. When restrictions are eventually lifted, officers know emotions may already be running high. Maintaining order becomes even more challenging. Holman has experienced repeated lockdowns over the years, each one reflecting the difficult balance between restoring security and maintaining daily operations. But one section of the prison follows an entirely different routine every single day. Death row. Life on Alabama's death row. For decades, Holman became known throughout the United States for one reason above all others. It housed Alabama's male death row. The men living there had already been convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. Many had exhausted years of appeals. Others still waited as attorneys challenged convictions or sentencing decisions in state and federal courts. Life on death row followed a far more restrictive routine than general population. Cells remained secured. Movement required escorts. Exercise periods occurred under close supervision. Visits followed strict security procedures. For some inmates, the wait lasted only a few years. For others, it stretched across decades. Every appeal brought hope. Every denied appeal brought another long period of uncertainty. That uncertainty became part of daily life. Some inmates spent their time studying law. Others turned toward religion. Some wrote books, letters, or journals. Others withdrew almost completely. Correctional officers working death row faced unique responsibilities. Every movement required careful documentation. Mental health concerns had to be monitored. Security remained constant. Because eventually, for some inmates, appeals would come to an end. And that meant preparations for one of the most solemn procedures carried out inside any American prison: the execution chamber. Holman became internationally known because Alabama carried out executions inside this facility for many years. The methods changed over time. Earlier executions were conducted using the electric chair. Later, lethal injection became Alabama's primary execution method, although state law has evolved and additional execution methods have since been authorized under certain legal circumstances. Execution days followed carefully planned procedures. Security increased. Staff assignments changed. Witnesses arrived under controlled conditions. Medical personnel prepared equipment. Legal teams remained available until the final moments in case courts issued last-minute orders. For correctional staff, these days carried emotional weight regardless of personal opinions about capital punishment. Every step had to follow legal requirements precisely. Every document had to be completed accurately. Every procedure had to withstand public scrutiny. Outside the prison, families of victims waited. Families of condemned inmates waited as well. Both experienced the day differently. Neither escaped its emotional impact. Executions made Holman famous. But they also overshadowed another crisis unfolding elsewhere inside the prison. One that affected nearly everyone living and working there. When officers become outnumbered. Maximum security prisons depend on visibility. Officers walk housing units. Observe behavior. Respond immediately when something appears unusual. But what happens when there simply are not enough officers? For years, Alabama's correctional system struggled to recruit and retain staff. Retirements increased. Resignations continued. New hires often left after experiencing the realities of the job. Remaining officers worked overtime. Sometimes mandatory overtime. Long shifts became common. Fatigue naturally followed. Former correctional professionals have often described staffing shortages as one of the greatest challenges facing modern prisons. Not because officers stop caring, but because fewer people must perform the same amount of work. A housing unit that ideally requires several officers may temporarily operate with far fewer. Emergency response teams may take longer to assemble. Routine searches become harder to schedule. Simple tasks consume more time. Inside Holman, these shortages became one of the most discussed issues in reports examining prison conditions. Officers continued reporting for duty. But many described working under extraordinary pressure. The risks were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. And eventually, those concerns reached the federal government. A system under investigation. By the late 2010s, growing concerns about violence inside Alabama prisons had attracted national attention. The issue extended beyond Holman. Multiple state facilities faced similar problems. Reports described overcrowding, staff shortages, frequent assaults, contraband, unsafe living conditions. Federal investigators eventually launched a civil rights investigation into Alabama's men's prisons. Their focus was not a single incident. Instead, investigators examined whether prison conditions exposed inmates to an unconstitutional risk of serious harm. The findings were deeply concerning. Investigators concluded that violence within parts of Alabama's prison system had become widespread and often predictable. They pointed to staffing shortages, overcrowding, and the availability of weapons as contributing factors. Holman appeared repeatedly throughout discussions surrounding those broader systemic challenges. The investigation did not claim that every officer or every administrator had failed. Instead, it described problems that had developed over many years, problems too large for individual employees to solve alone. The findings intensified public debate. How should dangerous prisons be made safer? Can overcrowding be reduced? How many officers are enough? Can decades of systemic problems truly be reversed? Those questions remain difficult. And as you'll see next, the people living inside Holman have developed their own answers shaped not by policy, but by survival. Surviving Holman. For many inmates, survival at Holman has never meant becoming the strongest man in the prison. It has meant becoming the least noticeable. Former inmates and correctional professionals have often described the same pattern. Those who constantly sought attention frequently found trouble. Those who respected boundaries, avoided unnecessary disputes, and followed routines generally had a better chance of making it through each day without incident. That did not mean they were safe. It simply meant they understood the environment. A disagreement over a seat in the dining hall could escalate into a fight. An unpaid debt from the commissary might lead to threats. A rumor passed between housing units could change the mood of an entire prison by nightfall. Inside Holman, information has always traveled faster than official announcements. Many inmates learned to read the atmosphere long before violence erupted. If conversations suddenly stopped when someone entered a room, something was changing. If officers increased searches without explanation, inmates' new intelligence had likely reached prison administrators. If movement was delayed, many assumed something serious had happened elsewhere in the facility. Living in that constant uncertainty creates its own kind of pressure. Weeks become months. Months become years. Some inmates eventually adapt. Others never do. And that invisible psychological burden affects everyone inside the prison, not only those serving sentences. The officers behind the badge. Whenever Holman appears in headlines, attention naturally focuses on inmates. Far less attention is given to the correctional officers who enter those gates every single day. Unlike prisoners, officers choose to walk inside. And every shift begins with uncertainty. No officer knows whether the day will end with routine counts and paperwork, or an emergency requiring immediate action. The job demands constant awareness. An officer must watch dozens, sometimes hundreds, of inmates while also monitoring subtle changes in behavior. A raised voice. A gathering that seems unusual. Someone refusing to leave a cell. Small details can signal much larger problems. When violence erupts, correctional officers are the first to respond. Often before specialized emergency teams arrive. Their responsibility is to restore order while protecting inmates, fellow officers, medical staff, and themselves. It is physically dangerous. It is mentally exhausting. And in prisons facing staffing shortages, the workload becomes even heavier. Many officers have described working long hours, mandatory overtime, and missing family events because replacements simply were not available. Despite these challenges, thousands continue serving in correctional facilities across the United States every day. Their work is rarely seen by the public. Yet it remains essential to the operation of every prison. Violence that could not be ignored. Holman's reputation did not develop because of a single event. It was built over decades. There were assaults that made national news. There were homicides involving inmates. There were attacks on correctional officers. Each incident renewed difficult questions about safety inside Alabama's prison system. Investigations repeatedly highlighted familiar concerns. Too many inmates. Too few officers. Too many homemade weapons. Too little space. Each problem reinforced the others. Prison administrators introduced new security measures. State officials proposed reforms. Federal oversight increased. Yet meaningful change inside any correctional system takes years. Buildings can be repaired. Policies can be rewritten. Additional officers can be hired. But changing the culture of a prison is far more complicated. Culture is shaped over decades. By thousands of individual decisions. By trust earned or lost. And by the experiences of everyone who has ever lived or worked behind those walls. That is why Holman's story is not simply about one prison. It reflects broader challenges facing correctional systems across America. A changing future. In recent years, Alabama has begun investing in new prison construction and broader correctional reforms aimed at addressing long-standing problems throughout the state. Supporters argue that newer facilities can improve safety, increase officer visibility, reduce overcrowding, and provide better medical and mental health services. Critics respond that buildings alone cannot solve systemic issues. They point to staffing, rehabilitation programs, mental health treatment, education, and re-entry planning as equally important pieces of the puzzle. Both perspectives acknowledge the same reality. The correctional system faces enormous challenges. Holman remains an important part of that conversation. Its history has become a case study examined by policymakers, legal experts, correctional professionals, and researchers seeking to understand how prisons evolve and how they sometimes reach a breaking point. Whether Holman's future ultimately reflects meaningful reform or simply another chapter in its difficult history remains to be seen. But one lesson has already become clear. Ignoring problems inside prisons rarely makes them disappear. Beyond the walls. It is easy to think of Holman Correctional Facility as simply another prison. A place separated from everyday life by concrete walls and razor wire. But prisons are reflections of the societies that build them. Inside Holman are men convicted of some of Alabama's most serious crimes. Also inside are correctional officers, nurses, maintenance workers, chaplains, counselors, and administrators. Every day, each enters an environment defined by rules, responsibility, and uncertainty. Some inmates will eventually return to society. Others will spend the remainder of their lives behind those walls. Some arrived on death row after being sentenced for capital murder. Others continue serving life sentences with no possibility of release. For every one of them, Holman became more than a prison. It became the world they woke up to every morning. The history of Holman is not only a story about punishment. It is also a story about overcrowding, institutional challenges, public safety, justice, accountability, and the difficult balance between maintaining order and respecting human dignity. Perhaps that is why Holman continues to fascinate people decades after it first opened. Because behind every locked door is another story, another decision, another consequence, another reminder that the most dangerous prisons are shaped not only by concrete and steel, but by the people living and working inside them. And long after the lights go out and the final headcount is complete, Holman remains one of the most infamous correctional facilities in America. Its walls still stand. Its history continues to grow. And the questions it raises about crime, punishment, and the future of corrections remain far from answered. Holman Correctional Facility has earned its place in American prison history, not because of a single event, but because it reflects decades of challenges, violence, reform efforts, and the complex realities of maximum security incarceration. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more fact-based crime and prison documentaries. And if there's another prison, criminal case, or historic event you'd like to see explored next, leave your suggestion in the comments. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and thank you for watching.